All right, good morning. Welcome to our Sunday school service on this beautiful Mother's Day. Good to see everybody here. All right, and before I open up in a word of prayer, do we have any requests that would like to be made today? You have an unspoken? Okay, well, let's remember that.
Let's remember Sister Lois Miller. Sister Lois was her and her daughter was in a car accident yesterday. About the only thing that they think maybe that's broke on Sister Lois is her nose, and just real sore. Her daughter just sore this morning. I called check on her this morning. But let's do remember that.
Okay, let's remember Sister Lois. All right, anyone else?
Let's still remember the Mitchell family. We know where Brother JD's at. He longed to go home for some time. So that's a blessed hope that we all have. Y'all agree with that?
Amen. Yeah, and so let's remember that family. Like, even though we know where he is, it's still hard to lose somebody. Okay. Now let's remember that family.
Just remember you all. I know you all had a busy week this past week. So remember you all as well.
Thank you. Yeah. Let's remember that I'm still in the process of getting all the boxes and everything opened up, and still have a few things to move over. All right. Anyone else? All right, let's go ahead and open here in a word of prayer. Lord, we thank you so much for bringing us here together this morning. God, we thank you so much for all that you've brought us through our lives here, Lord. And God, we thank you so much for giving your Son to die on the cross for us, that we may be redeemed to you, Lord. And God, I just ask that you would be with the many requests that have been made here this morning, that for those that have for the families that have lost loved ones, that have been in accidents, that we're each of us are going through our trials and struggles, Lord, and so any unspoken requests, we'd also ask that you'd be with as well, Lord. And Lord, we know that we have many in the bulletin that we ask you to reach out and touch and have your way with, Lord. And God, we ask that you would be with our country and our leaders, Lord. And God, with this being Mother's Day, we want to remember all the mothers, and all the ones that take care of children and fulfill that role, Lord. We ask that you would be with them, Lord. And God, we ask that you would be with us here this morning as we go in and dive into your word, Lord, that you would be with each of the Sunday school teachers, including myself, and that you would guide us through that, Lord, and have something that we can share with our classes, Lord, and you help them grow in the word, Lord. And God, I ask that you would be with each of the classes here, that we would be ready and willing and to hearken unto you in your word and what you have to teach us, Lord, and that we'd be able to take that in and take it with us through this week, Lord. For in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, so we're going to look over here and we're going to look at some more of Joseph's life. So in the in the last chapter here, we'd seen Joseph's brothers were jealous of him, and because he was favored by Jacob, which is something that we had seen over the past, that Jacob had that problem of favoritism. He had that favoritism for his wife. He had his favoritism for his sons, and through that, it made the other sons jealous, and then they ended up tossing him into to that well and then selling him off to the Egyptians. And so that's where we're going to pick up here, is where he's been enslaved and sold to the Egyptians. So I'm going to start here with 39, and we're going to look at verses 1 through 6. All right, and Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh's captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man. And he was in the house of his master the Egyptian, and his master saw that the Lord was with him. And the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and served him, and made him overseer of his house, and all that he had put into his hand. And it came to pass from the time that he had made him overseer in his house, and all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught he had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person, and well favored. All right, so we see that because Joseph was sold here to Potiphar, that officer of Pharaoh's captain of the guard, which that may also just be a title, just like Pharaoh, but he was sold there to the captain of the guard, and we see that the Lord has been working through this. So he's a high-ranking official that he's been sold to in Egypt. We see that the Lord was with Joseph. And we see that this Egyptian, this pagan, sees that the Lord was with him. He sees that everything that Joseph does is blessed, and because of the blessing that Joseph has, it's expanded unto Potiphar's house here, and so he finds this favor in his sight as he's serving him, and so. He's promoted here in three ways. So where it says, he served him, that means that he is his direct servant. He's the servant for Potiphar, his personal servant. And then he makes him overseer of the house. So he's the one that oversees all the rest of the servants and everything else within the home. And we see that. Because of that he's blessed because of Joseph's sake. So he'd seen that the Lord was with him and he was prospering. He made him his servant, his specific servant. He's serving within the house instead of out in the fields. And then we see that he's overseeing the whole house. So he's very highly favored as far as being a servant there. And then. We see some of the beginning of trouble here. It mentions that he's a goodly or handsome person, and he's well favored. So he's handsome and he's well favored. And so let's look at these next verses here. So let's look at 7, and then I'll go ahead and read through the end of the chapter. Right, and it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, "Lie with me." But he refused, and said unto his master's wife, "Behold, my master wotteth not what is with me in the house, and he hath committed all that he hath to my hand." And so we see here that because he's good looking and favored, that the Potiphar's wife casts her eyes upon him. She immediately lusts after him and asks him to lie with her. And we see that Joseph knows that this is not a good situation here, and so he immediately refuses, and he says, he's put me over everything, everything that that I could want or that I could need within the house. I have, but I know that you're committed to him. I can't take that. Okay, and so let's look on at 9 and 10 here. He says, "There is none greater in this house than I. Neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then could I do this wickedness and sin against God? And we see here that he's not thinking carnally. He's thinking about God. He sees that he's been blessed, and that he sees that he's been well taken care of within that house, and he sees that he can't do this wickedness, and that specifically it's a sin against God. And in verse 10 it says, "And it came to pass, as she spoke to Joseph day by day, that he hearkened not unto her to lie with her or to be with her. And it came to pass at about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of the house there within. And she caught him by his garment and said, Lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled and got him out." And so we see that she just keeps at it. She won't leave him alone. In verse 10, she keeps going on, and then we look at verses 11 and 12, and I'm sure that this specifically was planned by her. She made sure that there was no other men in the house other than him. So it was just going to be him and her in that house, and she knew that he was coming in to do his work that day. And so she thought she'd got him, because she catches him by the garment, by his clothes, and says, "Lie with me." And he wants to make sure to rid himself of this temptation, to just let it all go. And so he makes sure to get out. He gets out of his clothes and runs off. And so let's look on at 13 here. Right, "And it came to pass, when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and was fled forth, she called unto the men of her house, and spake unto them, saying, See, he hath brought me in an Hebrew to us, to mock us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice. And it came to pass, when he heard, that I lifted up my voice and cried, and he left his garment with me and fled, and got him out. And she laid up his garment by her, until his Lord came home. And she spake unto him according to these words, saying, The Hebrew servant which thou hast brought unto us came in to mock me. And it came to pass, as I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment with me and fled out. And it came to pass, when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spake unto him, saying, After this manner did thy servant to me, and his wrath was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound. And he was there in the prison. But the Lord was with Joseph, and showed him mercy, and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison. And whatsoever they did there, he was the order of it. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him. And that which he did, the Lord made it to prosper." All right, and so we see here that the wife lies. She has the garment. She takes it and points it out to all the servants and says, look how this Hebrew's mocked us. He came in and he tried to force himself on me, and he ran out when I screamed. And then she also tells the Potiphar as well, the same thing. And so he puts him into prison. Whether or not that Potiphar believed her fully or not, we don't know. But he made sure that Joseph was put into prison, and he was put into the prison with where the king's prisoners were bound. And then we see that even though he was in prison, we see that the Lord was with Joseph. There, he showed him mercy, and again he had favor in the sight in the prison. He was put over all of the prisoners. And we see that whatever he did within the prison, you're prospered again. We see that he's blessed through these things. Even though he's resisted this temptation, but still was punished wrongly. But the Lord was still with him and taking care of him. So let's look at verse in chapter 40, we'll see that even through this, God had a plan and was working through this for Joseph here and his family. All right, so let's look at verses 1 through 6 here in chapter 40. Right, and it came to pass after these things that the butler of the king of Egypt and his baker had offered their lord the king of Egypt. Had offended their lord the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was wroth against two of his officers, and against chief of the butlers, and against the chief of the bakers. And he put them in the ward of the house of the captain of the guard, into the prison, the place where Joseph was bound. And the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them, and they continued a season in the ward. And they dreamed a dream, both of them, each man his dream in one night, each man according to the interpretation. According to the interpretation of his dream, the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt, which were bound in prison. And Joseph came unto them in the morning, and looked upon them, and behold, they were sad. All right, so we see here that he's bound with two of the king's servants, the butler or cupbearer, and the baker. And the cupbearer would make sure that he would taste the wine or whatever drink that would be offered to Pharaoh to make sure it was safe before he brought it to him. But they were there, and because Pharaoh was mad at them, and they were both there, and we see that they were in the ward of the house of the captain of the guard, which we're assuming would be Potiphar, since he was the captain of the guard. All right, and so we see that he's put Joseph in charge of them. He charged Joseph to take care of them, and they, continued in there. And then, each of these men had a dream, both of them in the same night, and they weren't able to. And Joseph sees that they were sad. So let's look at 7 through 13 here, and let's see their dreams and how this worked here. Right, and he asked Pharaoh's officers that were with him in the ward of his lord's house, saying, Wherefore do they look so sadly today? And they said unto him, We have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. And Joseph said unto them, Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me, I pray you. All right, so let me stop there for a moment. So we see that they've dreamed a dream, and they're sad because they don't have anyone there to interpret their dream. That was something that was taken very seriously in those times. They would go to these. It was a particular science. They would go to these people and these magicians and wise men, and they would ask them to give them the interpretations of this dream. What do these dreams mean? Can you tell me more about it? They're in prison, and there's no one there. But we see that Joseph, being a godly man, immediately says, don't these interpretations belong to God? And so, with that, he says, tell me them, I pray you. So he wants them to tell him so that he can let God guide him through those interpretations and give them those interpretations, which is why he was here in this prison in the first place. So why God had put him there. So let's look on at verse 9 here. Right, and the chief butler told his dream to Joseph, and said to him, In my dream, behold, a vine was before me, and in the vine were 3 branches, and it was though it had budded, and her blossoms shot forth, and the clusters thereof brought forth ripe grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. And Joseph said unto him, This is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thine head and restore thee unto thy place. And thou shalt deliver Pharaoh's cup into his hand after the former manner when thou wast his butler. All right, so we see that he sees this dream. It's the dream of the vine and the branches. And, we see that it comes out, they bring forth grapes, and then he's crushing the grapes and putting them in the cup and bringing it to Pharaoh. And so, Joseph, gives him that interpretation that, that the branches are 3 days. And so he lets him know that within 3 days that he's going to be, back in Pharaoh's court, being the cupbearer again. All right, so let's look at verses, 14 through 23 here, and we'll see with the dream for the baker. Or I'm sorry, there's a reminder, and then he asks, then he does it for the baker. All right, and so in verse 14, but think on me when it shall be with thee, and show kindness, I pray thee, unto me, and make mention of me unto Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house. For indeed I was stolen away out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also have I done nothing that they should put me in the dungeon. All right, so in 14 and 15 here we see that after he's given this interpretation, that he says that when this happens, to the cupbearer, when this happens, remember me, mention me to Pharaoh, and so that I can be brought out of this prison, because he lets him know that he's a Hebrew, he's been taken out of his land, and he's been imprisoned here for no legitimate reason. What had happened was a lie there. All right, so he asks the cupbearer to remember, and so let's look at the chief baker. All right, so in verse 16, all right, when the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, he said unto Joseph, I also was in my dream, and behold, I had 3 white baskets on my head, and in the othermost basket was all manner of baked meats for Pharaoh, and the birds did eat them out of the basket upon my head. And Joseph answered and said, This is the interpretation thereof. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Yet within 3 days Pharaoh shall lift up thy head from off of thee, and shall hang thee on a tree, and the birds shall eat thy flesh from off thee. And it came to pass on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast unto all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief butler and of the chief baker among his servants. And he restored the chief butler unto his butlership again, and he gave the cup unto Pharaoh's hand. And he hanged the chief baker, as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forgat him. All right, so we see that chief baker. He sees after that there was that good interpretation for the cupbearer, that he wanted his dream interpreted. His was interpreted, and unfortunately, it was that he was going to be killed. He was going to be hanged. And then on that 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, it played out just as Joseph had interpreted. Pharaoh has this large feast for his birthday. He lets the cupbearer go and restores him back to the court, and then he hangs the baker. But we see, despite that unfortunately the butler did not remember Joseph, and instead he forgot him. All right, so let's look at chapter 41 here, and let's look at these first verses here, 1 through 12, and we'll see how this continues to play out here for Joseph. All right, and it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed a dream, and behold, he stood by a river. And behold, there came up out of the river 7 well-favored kine, or cows, and fat-fleshed, and they fed in the meadow. And behold, 7 other kine came up after them out of the river, ill-favored and lean-fleshed, and stood by the other kine upon the brink of the river. And the ill-favored and lean-fleshed kine did eat up the 7 well-favored kine and well-favored and fat kine. So Pharaoh awoke, and he slept and dreamed a 2nd time. And behold, 7 ears of corn came upon one stalk, rank and good. And behold, the 7 thin ears, and blasted with the east wind, sprung up after them. And the 7 thin ears devoured the 7 rank and full ears, and Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. And it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent out and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all the wise men thereof. And Pharaoh told them his dream, but there was none that could interpret them unto Pharaoh. All right, so I'll stop here for a moment. So we see that after Joseph being in prison for those and being with the chief butler and with the baker, that it was another 2 years after he'd been forgotten and he was still in prison, that God came to we know that God came to Pharaoh here, and he dreamed a dream. And so he sees the 7 fat cows come up out of the river, and then 7 skinny cows come up out of the river, and the skinny cows eat the fat cows. And then he goes to sleep, and then a second time he dreams a dream. And this time he sees 7 ears of corn or wheat. And he sees the good ears come up first, and then after that he sees these sickly ears, these ones that are withered. And it mentions the east wind because that's going to come off from the desert, so that it's going to dry them up. And he sees those eat the good ears of corn. And so he wakes up, and he knows that and Pharaoh knows that there's something wrong. He knows that he sees this dream, and he knows that there's something to it, and he's seen it twice. So he definitely wants some type of interpretation of it. And so we see that he sends out for all the magicians of Egypt, anyone that, and all the wise men, all these people that are supposed to be able to interpret these dreams, and none of them can do it. All right, and so let's look at verse 9, and I'll read verses 9 through 13. All right, so then spake the chief butler unto Pharaoh, saying, I do remember my faults this day. Pharaoh was wroth with his servants, and put me in the ward, in the captain of the guard's house, both me and the chief baker. And we dreamed a dream in one night, I and he, and we dreamed each man according to the interpretation of his dream. And there was with us a young man, an Hebrew, servant to the captain of the guard, and we told him, and he interpreted to us our dream. To each man according to his dream he did interpret. And it came to pass, and he interpreted it to us, so it was. Me he restored unto mine office, and him he hanged. So we see here that, after these 2 years, that the chief butler remembers Joseph, and lets him know that this young man, this Hebrew, this servant to the captain of the guard, we'd told him our dream, and he interpreted it for us. And and I think this is a good reminder here that even though we ask of something, God, it may take God a while for it to come to pass for us, or for it to come through and in fruition for His plan. He'd allowed God to help him interpret that, and I'm sure Joseph had asked God to help him get out of that prison, and he thought that maybe the chief butler here that God has allowed me to interpret this dream for. He's going to go to Pharaoh, and he's going to let me out. And we see that it comes to this point, but it was 2 years after the fact. Sometimes it's not always immediate that you ask God and you get it. Sometimes you have to wait. And we see that, and as we'll see here, that Joseph didn't lose faith in God, and he waited there patiently. So let's look at these next verses here. All right, so I'll start at 14. All right, then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon. And he shaved himself and changed his raiment, and came in unto Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I have dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it. I have heard say of thee that thou canst understand a dream and interpret it. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not mine. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. So, we see here that in verses 14 through 16 here. So in verse 14, that Pharaoh listens to the chief butler and asks for Joseph. He brings him out of prison, and then we see that he shaved himself, which is an Egyptian custom, and it's not anything Hebrew because of how hot it is in Egypt. A lot of people, a lot of the Egyptians would make sure that they were clean shaven, so that. And so they had him in that same custom as the Egyptians, since he was going to be in court. So he shaved himself, he changes his clothes, and comes to Pharaoh. And then Pharaoh says, I've dreamed this dream, and none of these people that I've asked to do it can interpret it, but I've heard that you can interpret it. And then we see Joseph, letting him know that we see Joseph gives God the glory here. He says, it's not me. God will give Pharaoh the interpretation of the dream. All right, so let me go on to 17 through 24, and we'll I'll read through where Pharaoh gives him gives him his dreams. All right, and Pharaoh said unto Joseph, in my dream, behold, I stood upon the bank of the river. And behold, there came up out of the river 7 kine, fat-fleshed and well-favored, and they fed in a meadow. And behold, 7 other kine came up after them, poor and very ill-favored and lean-fleshed, such as I have never seen in all the land of Egypt for badness. And the lean and ill-favored kine did eat up the first 7 fat kine. And when they had eaten them up, it could not be known that they had eaten them, but they were still ill-favored, as at the beginning, so I awoke. And I saw in my dream, and behold, 7 ears come up in one stalk, full and good. And behold, 7 ears withered, and blasted with the east wind sprung up after them. And the thin ears devoured the 7 good ears. And I told this unto the magicians, but there was none that could declare it to me. And I also want you to notice that, even though this had been repeated from the dream earlier, we get more information this time. In this one, he points out that, he's never seen anything like these ill-favored, cattle that are lean-fleshed in all of the land of Egypt before, in this ugliness. And then, he also points out that even though they had eaten these fat-fleshed cattle, that they don't see any change. That he doesn't see any change in them. They're still wean-fleshed. And so let's look on at verse 25, and we'll read what Joseph's interpretation here, or what God gives for Joseph as the interpretation. All right, and Joseph said unto Pharaoh, the dream of Pharaoh is one. God hath showed Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good kine are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dream is one. And the 7 thin and ill-favored kine that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty ears, blasted with the east wind, shall be 7 years. This is the thing which I have spoken unto Pharaoh. What God is about to do, he has showed unto Pharaoh. All right, so in this first section we see that he lets Pharaoh know that these dreams are one, that God has shown Pharaoh what he's going to do. So, all of this that had happened to Joseph up to this point was to bring him to Pharaoh, for this interpretation of these dreams, and to let Egypt know what was going to happen here. So he lets him know that the thin and ill-favored are 7 years, and those that were ranking good are 7 years. And he says that these things that you've seen is what God is about to do. So let's look at let's start on verse 29, and let's get the specifics here. All right. So he said, "Behold, there come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt, and they shall arise after them 7 years of famine. And all the plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine shall consume the land. And the plenty shall not be known in the land by the reason of that the famine following, for it shall be very grievous." All right, so and again, I wanted to point back out where he gave that extra information in the dream. We see that when they had eaten the other the other cattle or the other corn, that they were still ill-favored, and they had never seen anything like that before. So this is, that's where he's getting or that's why how God is showing them that this is going to be a famine so great that you're going to forget about how good this plenteous season is beforehand, and it's going to be a famine that's such that you've never seen before. Right, and so let's look at verse 32. And for that the dream was doubled unto Pharaoh twice, it is because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. So he lets him know that it's repeated and repeated twice because it's something that's going to come shortly, and it's going to come quickly. So he's letting them know basically that you're gonna have to get prepared. All right, so let's look at 33, because beyond the interpretation here, we see that Joseph is going to give some advice here as well. So it says, "Now therefore, let Pharaoh look out a man, discreet and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint his officers over the land, and take up a fifth part of the land of Egypt in the 7 plenteous years. Gather all the food of those good years that come, and lay up corn under the hand of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. And that food shall be for store to the land against the 7 years of famine, which shall be in Egypt, in the land of Egypt, that the land shall perish not through famine." All right, so